Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going through the most important tip for painting realistic hair using watercolors. So let's get straight into the video. So the most important tip for painting realistic hair in watercolors is building your painting up using layers. So let me explain this technique whilst painting a small section of hair to begin with, and then I'll be going through a full hair study. So the first layer you paint needs to be a very light wash of colour with a lot of water mixed into the paint to make it really light. Your first wash should match the colour of the hair's highlights that you see in the reference, and you should apply that first wash all over the hair study because the first wash is just to block in the shape of the hair, so that wash should go everywhere because it should match the lightest colour of the hair. When using the layer technique, you must wait for each layer to completely dry before building up a new layer. Otherwise, the colours will just bleed into each other and you won't get any definition. And when you're painting realistic hair, you want detail. So you want to make sure that you're waiting for each layer to completely dry before building up a new wash of colour. Your paint should get darker and darker as you build up more layers, and every layer following your first wash should be building up detail in the hair. So the first wash is the only wash where you're just blocking in the whole area. With every layer after that, you're really trying to build up the detail. It's good to build up your layers from light to dark, as this really helps to prevent you from painting your highlights too dark accidentally. With each new layer, you should be painting less and less areas because as the paint is getting darker, they should only be really added to the darkest areas that you can see in the reference image for the hair. And so your final layer should just be painting in the darkest shadows. And as you build up more detail, I really do recommend using a small round paintbrush. The smaller the paintbrush, the easier it is to get in lots of details and make it look really realistic. And you can also use that tiny brush to paint in all of the flyaway hairs. I start by mixing a very light wash of colour, like I said, with lots of water mixed in. And again, I cover the whole hair study with this to start with. I don't miss out any areas. And now once I've added in that first wash, I make sure that I wait for that layer to completely dry before I build up the second layer. And meanwhile, whilst you're waiting for that to dry, you can mix up the colour that you'll need for the second layer. And all I do to mix up this new colour is just add a bit more of that brown paint, because this is a brown hair study, mix in a bit more brown paint into that first wash colour that we mixed up. This way it's getting a bit darker because you're adding more pigment to it. Then once you've waited for that layer to dry, you can build up your second layer, and this is where you are basically building up the midtones in your painting. So you're adding the second wash everywhere but the brightest highlights. And make sure that you're using a brush small enough to do this so that you can get in all of the little details. So always build up the hair using lines that are going with the direction the hair is going in. And I recommend working on the hair in sections. Now once you've built up that second wash, once again wait for it to completely dry, and meanwhile you can add a bit more paint into the colour from the second wash so that it gets darker. And then once you've waited for that second layer to dry, you can go in and you can paint in even more shadows. And because we've got in the midtones now, really we're just going to be adding the third layer to those shadowed areas that you can see in the reference. So all of the shadows in the hair. And like I said, as you are getting into the final sort of layers for your painting, you shouldn't be adding them to too many areas, just to the darkest areas that you can see in your reference. And when you get into doing these final layers, I really recommend switching to a smaller brush so that you can get in even more detail. And keep building up those layers, waiting in between for each layer to dry until you have got the darker shadows in the reference as dark as they need to be. So you may have to keep building up more and more layers. You might have to build up maybe 6 or 5 layers, especially if you are going very slowly, you're gradually getting darker at a very slow pace. And adding in more layers is going to give more depth to your painting because it's going to have more values in there. And I really recommend making sure that your highlights are as bright as they need to be and your shadows are as dark as they need to be in order for your hair to have a really nice contrast and for it to look 3D and for it to have depth. Now finally, make sure you use a tiny brush to add in those individual flyaway hairs that are going over the hairstyle and also into the background as well, as this will really help to make your hair look realistic and natural. Because if your hair looks really uniformed and it hasn't got these individual flyaway hairs, then it's just going to look very uniformed and it might look a bit cartoony because it's very rigid. Whereas in reality, hair has got a lot of motion to it, so make sure that it has a nice flow by adding in these individual hairs. So that is it. That is the most important tip for painting realistic hair using watercolors. That is building it up in layers and waiting for those layers to dry in between. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments section what other watercolor tutorials you'd like to see on this channel, whether that's for realistic watercolor painting or painting in a more expressive style. Let me know. But thank you all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new around here, and even tick that bell icon so you do get notified on my future videos. But that is it from me, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye everybody.